well, because I was able to see him. And I'm like, this fool's following me. And just to make sure, because I'm trying not to act paranoid, but when there's a cop behind you, it's difficult not to act paranoid, particularly if your status of your government-issued driver's license is in a state of rebuilding, or whatever you want to call it. So just to make sure, I take a right, and he takes a right. Then I take a left, and he takes a left. And I'm like, this fool's following me, but he won't pull me over yet. I think he was enjoying the psychological game, of making me sweat, kind of a power trip or whatever. But I'm amazed. This was before the hands-free, where they don't let you be on your cell phone while you're driving unless you're a cop that has a laptop in his car. It's okay for the cop to have a laptop, but if you use your telephone, then you're getting a ticket. That's hypocritical as all get out, but that's where we are right now. Anyways, but this was 2017. So eventually, I see the cherry lights in my rearview mirror, and I'm like, this fool's pulling me over. First thing I notice is I'm not on a very well-lit street, and anything could happen. And anything does happen fairly routinely. This fool could shoot me dead and then throw crack cocaine in my hands, or put a gun in my hands, and then say, look what I had to do in self-defense. There are stories of police traveling with fake guns in their trunk to put in people's hands in the event they have to shoot somebody, and they have to incriminate that person to manufacture a reason why they killed him. Of course, now they have body cameras, but some of them will turn them off. Who are you going to run to? The policeman is protected by organized labor in the public sector. He could kill a child in front of a camera, and there will still be a union rep arbitrating to get his job back, and there will be a union paid-for lawyer to try to keep him out of jail. So anyways, my rule of thumb is I never pull over for an unmarked car. He was marked and identified as a policeman, but I never pull over in a badly lit place. So about a half a block up, there was a gas station. Pulled into the gas station because I knew under the covering and the lights, that little roof thing that is over the pumps, there'd be a lighting, there'd be witnesses coming in and out of the gas station. There would also be security cameras. So he gets out of his car and walks towards me with his chest sticking out like he's this badass. And I'm like, I already know this is going to be ugly. And he said, is there any reason why you didn't pull over when I wanted you to? And I said, I was just looking for a safe place to pull over, out of the way. He said, that's not up to you to decide. So he had a view of police and civilian relations in which he thought he was positionally in a place to dictate to me where I can and can't pull over, and my decision-making is non-existent. I said, yes, it is for me to decide. A, I'm the driver. B, I'm the taxpayer. C, I'm the voter. And yes, I chose to pull over here. Why have you pulled me over? And the reason I got raw with him, my relationship to the police, it can go either way. I'm either cool and cooperative, or I'm adversarial. And the pace and the mood and the atmosphere of the conversation is dictated by the conduct of the policeman. If the policeman understands, hey, I'm a public servant, my salary, medical, dental, vision, benefits, pension, my whole family's lifestyle is paid for by these people, and they're trusting me in this position to keep law and order, and I'm going to treat them with respect. When that comes out of a person's mouth, I'll shoot the crap with them all day and have a good time. But when it's reversed, as in, I'm ontologically superior in my being because I have a badge and this person doesn't, and they're going to do what the heck I tell them, then me and that cop are not going to get along very well. Especially when you're an ignorant fool who maybe has a little bit better than a high school education, and you try to act as though you're more intelligent. Like if you have an exaggerated view of your training and skill set, and it gets exposed in your conversation with me. So he says, have you been drinking? I said, no, have you? And he got really angry. But He said, you got a smart mouth. I said, well, you basically asked me an accusatory question, insinuating as your starting point that I was drinking. I don't drink. He said, you mean you've never drank in your life? This is how stupid this cop was getting. I said, well, sometimes, on New Year's Eve, I'll have a couple to be social or whatever, on a special occasion. He said, so a minute ago when you said you don't drink, you were lying. And I'm like, this his idiocy knows no bounds. So I said, officer, is this amateur logician night? Because if you're trying to play cross-examiner, trained philosopher, intelligent thinker, you're not pulling it off. You've pulled me over. If you feel that I've committed a crime that is prosecutable, that a jury of my peers, 12 people, would unanimously, after seeing me confront and cross-examine you in an open court, would convict me beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty. If you think that I've done something like that, then write me a ticket, or you have to leave me alone unless you're arresting me or detaining me. Explain yourself why you've pulled me over. And he said, well, arguing with me is going to get you a ticket. I said, good, I'll see you in court. Write me the ticket. I'm going to let you go with a warning this time. And I'm like, this fool, it was like, if I lowered my IQ 30 points, maybe I could have had a conversation. But see, it is the police that are supposed to serve the people, but some police have it backwards and think it's the people that serve the police. This is not a third world banana republic. I'm not a slave. I'm not a criminal. I have not forfeited my rights. And no, I don't care if you have a badge, a gun, a taser, you have some mace, you have a baton. If you have an attitude, then you're not going to get any. Why do you think the neighborhood has such a terrible relationship with the police? Because they feel this wide open, Wild West gangster attitude where they can treat people how they want and kill people for nothing, and there's going to be no consequence. It's like Pleasure Island on, you ever watch Pinocchio? When they go to the island and they're throwing rocks through windows and they're doing all this crap, and there's no consequence, the true person comes out. And you can say, wow, this kid seemed good till he got to Pleasure Island. And his freedom became license, and you can see the evil come out of the kid. Same thing with the police. When there's no consequences for bad behavior, killing people. Why does he have gunshots in his armpits? Probably because his hands were in the air is the only way I can think of where you'd have an entrance wound in someone's armpit. The police get to do whatever they want to people, tasing elderly ladies and stuff in their front yard or whatever. And that's why if the people don't have a reasonable trust, if there's not a public confidence in the institutions that are financed by them, for the purpose of protecting them for keeping law and order, not for occupying them like a military. It's natural, it's logical for free people to have a little bit of resistance. That's why when the police go to North Minneapolis and say, did anybody see anything? We're not talking to you. Anybody hear anything? We're not talking to you. Get out of my front lawn. You know what I mean? So anyways, yeah, this cop, I guess he took a philosophy class or something in his criminology training. But I'm like, I'm trained in Western thought and logic, and he doesn't qualify to tie my shoes. And I ran into someone who knew him later, and he had been promoted. So every cop that I met who's a good cop, they end up injured or something, and they go on leave. That's been my history. Or they move around a little bit. Every cop I met who's a moron, who's an idiot, who could screw up a cup of coffee, those cops get promoted. I know one in Fridley that got promoted, and he's probably one of the stupidest human beings across the board that I've ever known. Anyways, that's that story. That was in 2017. I got a warning, which, because I pulled over in the right place and because I invoked my Fifth Amendment, I'm not going to answer your questions. I don't have a lawyer present. It is not my job to do the job of the state for them. I'm not going to give you any information that's useful. you can jump off a cliff. To this day, I don't even know why he pulled me over. I think he said, get that taillight fixed when he was walking away, but there was no taillight problem. I have no clue why he pulled me over, and I don't care. But, yeah, that was an interesting story. This next email, it comes in from refmorey@hotmail.com. That is R as in research, E as in education, F as in foundation, Morey, M as in Mary, O-R-E-Y, refmorey@hotmail.com. And, yeah, Kira and every lady I've ever met who has been named Kira has been lovely. And when I say that, I mean 3. They've always been great people to be around. Gresham, Oregon, she says, I love your YouTube clips. I and my son learned so much. Please don't stop doing what you're doing. Please keep releasing the old archived audio clips. I was watching a courtroom drama TV show, and a witness who was a preacher invoked ministerial privilege. Is this a real thing? Have you ever had to use it? Well, Kira, thank you very much. I'm glad that something that's being said here is being a benefit for your spiritual growth, both for yourself and that of your son. A lot of ladies I know have their son listen to my show, some of my old tapes, my old CDs, to try to Islam-proof their house. The best way to get your son out of Islam is to never let him fall into it. And if your son keeps listening to me, here's hoping that the facts and the evidence and the teachings that I bring forth from the Word of God will cause him to grow, and may Jesus save him if he hasn't already. But ministerial privilege can also be called clerical privilege. I hate to even have to do this, but we live in a time period where I'm going to have to define the word privilege. The word privilege has been raped by political leftists who have a 20th century Eastern European dictatorial philosophy as it relates to man and man's relationship to secular human government, i.e. the state. To organize a proletariat, as in frontline foot soldiers, to carry the bucket, to bring about an overthrow of existing economic, social, political, and governmental conditions. How could you get an army of soldiers who are willing to stand in front of the police and the dogs and the guns and the tasers and the pepper spray and the riot gear and all that stuff, willing to be harmed to bring about some kind of social change? Well, you saw it in Russia. You saw it in China. You see it in a lot of places. Joe Schmo, who works at Chick-fil-A, before he confronts the police who have weapons that they don't, there has to be a psychological, motivational force that drives him to that protest. How do you create those emotions inside of people? Through a propaganda campaign. Okay? And Vladimir Lenin had this thing called the Bolshevik and the Menshevik. The Bolshevik was the majority, the Menshevik was the minority. Now, you had to make the people on the ground think that they held to the majority view. And if you can think of 2011 and the Occupy Wall Street movement, they used the Bolshevik versus Menshevik struggle, if you will. I hate to use the word struggle because that's been maligned. That's been redefined. They used it to, instead of majority versus minority, they just simply said 99% versus 1%. So you have to overthrow the evil, tyrannical 1%. Well, that's borrowed from a previous century where they said, you have to overthrow the evil in the tyrannical Menshevik. We have to organize the Bolsheviks on the street. So different shell, but same nut. See, different generation, but same ancient teaching. and it's the revolutionary mentality. Now, in the 1960s, a communist front group called the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS as it were, what they did was to organize a Menshevik on the street, to organize a proletariat. They would balkanize the population into their various groups. So if you wanted to organize the non-white people to put themselves in front of the police dogs, you had to make them think that the polar opposite of themselves was getting stuff for free and getting stuff on their back. These people are benefiting from your labor. So to the non-white person, you'd say, the white people have white privilege. If you want to organize the radical feminists, you say, the men have male privilege. If you want to organize the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, pedophiliac group, okay, the sexual deviant perversion group, you have to tell them straight privilege, okay? If you want to organize the atheists, the communists, the agnostics, the garden variety, spiritists and pagans and astrologers, you have to say Christian privilege, Jewish privilege. If you want to organize people who are handicapped, you have to say that the people who are in good health are privileged and have had it too good for too long. If you want to organize the immigrant population, you have to say America traditionally has had hemispheric privilege. So privilege has been a key word that the red agitator, or today we would call it a community organizer, uses to call out to the proletariat and the revolutionaries in the audience who understand the language of the movement. They hear the word privilege, it automatically, the culture has trained them to become like Pavlov's slobbering dog. Pavlov would hear, the dog would hear the bell and start drooling because of a conditioned response. It took time to condition that response. Same with the pissed off person on the street. You get them to smash windows and to be willing to go to jail or die. How do you do that? You have to use the word privilege. So if you ever want to end a discussion with me and have me think you're totally stupid, say such things as white privilege, male privilege, straight privilege, hemispheric privilege. Use the word privilege in a communist way. All you show me is you're a robot who's carrying the bucket for a political leftist movement, and you're using terminology that was written in the marketing department of a globalist corporation whose end goal it is to have America absorbed into a one-world globalist scheme, a one-world socialist government where there's a headquarters that tells America and other countries what to do. And that's, I've already been on several rabbit trails, but that's not the context in which Kira is using privilege. She's using it in the sense of executive privilege, spousal privilege, attorney-client privilege. It is that right that you have when there's a relationship between yourself and a professional that you trust, that you confide in, or a spouse cannot be compelled to give damning testimony against a spouse or whatever. An attorney cannot discuss in public what he said and what him and his client talked about in private. Okay, there's huge, ridiculous consequences. Now, this ministerial privilege, this clergy privilege, it varies from one state to another. Okay, all of our justice system is based on how dare the state accuse me of a crime. I'm minding my business, going to and from work, eating Fruit Loops, watching Maury Povich, living ghetto fabulous. I don't hurt anyone. The state is now hauling me into court and accusing me of a crime. How dare they? Okay? They have to put up or shut up. They have to define, document, demonstrate, and defend, like I said before, beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty in a unanimous fashion to 12 of my peers that I did this. The evidence has to be explosive. There can be no doubt. If you can't do it, then get out of my face. But in Minnesota, it's situational per state. Minnesota, here it is, and I know it very well. You go through the Minnesota statutes, you come to Minnesota chapter 595, and in particular that has to do with witnesses. A witness is defined as a person whose declaration under oath is received as evidence, whether such declaration is made on oral examination or by deposition or affidavit. Okay? As you read about witnesses, in chapter 595, you come across 595.02. Subdivision 1, paragraph C, quote, a member of the clergy or other minister of any religion shall not, without the consent of the party making the confession, be allowed to disclose a confession made to the member of the clergy or any minister in a professional character in the course of discipline enjoined by the rules or practice of the religious body to which the member of the clergy or other minister belongs. Nor shall a member of the clergy or any minister of any religion be examined as to any communication made to the member of the clergy or other minister by any person seeking religious or spiritual advice, aid, or comfort, or advice given thereon in the course of the member of the clergy's or other minister's professional character without the consent of the person. Close quote. So it's very much like, you got to picture HIPAA, okay? You go to your doctor's office and you're treated for a hangnail or whatever. Okay, that is protected. The doctor cannot discuss that with anyone unless you fill out a medical release of information, and it's very specific the way it's worded, and there's literally 9 criteria. The document has to meet all 9 criteria, or they cannot lawfully discuss it. You could sue them. Okay, if someone comes to me saying, Reverend Shanley, Dr. Shanley, Minister Shanley, however they know me, I did this, I did that. If the government knocks on my door to try to compel me to testify against that person, you already know, if you know me, that I'm not going to be cooperative to begin with on its face. But I cannot lawfully discuss it because I could get in trouble, because I'm violating something very sacred. The law protects my parishioner, if you want to call it that, my Bible student. But the state can't compel me to do it. So I've invoked this probably a couple times in my life. I had one minister say, I'm invoking, he was supposed to testify against me. And it's funny, if you've ever shown up to a hearing where you are the accused and the people testifying against you, you've never met them. That you talk about a kangaroo proceeding. I had people that were going to testify against me that I'd never met. And I'm like, I wonder what I did to these people that I never met. And it was very interesting. It was orchestrated by one person who wanted to harm me. But a minister was being compelled to testify against me. And he said, I'm going to invoke the privilege. And I'm like, I didn't do nothing. You know I didn't do nothing. So take the mic and just tell it like it is. But he had my permission. Okay? And it ended up working in my favor quite a bit, because then I had the chance to address him. But generally speaking, no. I have enough secrets, if people confided in me as their clergy person, as it were, that I could ruin lives, families, communities, churches, businesses. There's some stuff that I'm going to take to the grave, okay? And it's part of the game. You don't discuss everything. And like I said, even if the state wanted me to testify against one of my parishioners, and when I use the word parishioner, when I use the word Bible student, I have it as a very elastic word that can be stretched like a rubber band, and it can include a lot of people. So if Will from the South Side that we hung out in 1993, he suddenly calls me and says, hey, I just shot a dude. He's not my Bible student, but he's coming to me knowing my position in the church, and everything's protected at that point. So he can talk to me about whatever he wants. Okay. I will tell you a quick story, and then we're going to move on to the next subject. But can I tell you guys, I'm going to have to cut this whole rant out of the final product. Maybe I'll release it on one of the lost archive things that Kira was just talking about one day, but it's definitely not going to make this episode because we're going to run out of time. However, I'm going to tell you one story about one time I made a judgment call and I violated this. I'm going to tell you why. First, I'll tell you the story. I had a friend from high school. Okay, he graduated with me in 1995. Say it with me, 1995. So he calls me in 2002. You got to understand, in 2002, I was not yet a licensed clergyman, as it were. I was what they call a minister in training. Okay, but I viewed it as the same office because the call is from God, not from the state. And when the church licenses a person, they're simply recognizing on the earth what God declared in heaven. And Paul said, I was set apart from my mother's womb. So I was set apart. I viewed myself as a clergy person at that point. Brother hadn't talked to me since 1995, and it was 2002. 7 years had elapsed. Okay. And I was 25 years old, about to turn 26, something like that. I had just gotten custody of my daughter. My daughter just turned 4. Okay, she was about to go to preschool in a few months. So life had moved on for me. He was still living in 1993, 1994, 1995, South Minneapolis. He was stuck and couldn't break free from that time period, at least in terms of his maturity level and where he was at in life and how he approached life. So he called me expecting to get the Brian Shanley from 1994. The Brian Shanley of 2002 was a grown man and didn't run the streets and cause trouble in Minneapolis anymore. He reported to a job in the telecommunications industry and worked a 9 to 5 and picked his daughter up from before and after school daycare and went home and watched television and did dishes. Okay, so that was not part of my life anymore. He calls me, and I had just gotten a cellular phone. It was very big. My friend Cameron bought it for me. Cameron bought me the cell phone because he's like, I can't ever get a hold of you. You need to have this in case I need to get a hold of you. That's how I got my first cell phone. And that was around 2001, 2002. So my friend calls me. I'm not going to say his name, but if he's listening, he knows exactly who he is. I can tell you his name. And he leaves me a voicemail. Okay. He says, Brian, I need you to call me. And he tells me this elaborate story, and my voicemail had a limit of 3 minutes, and he used every second of it. Essentially, a gang had fronted him somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 worth of marijuana and other drugs. The idea was he was to move this on the street and liquidate it into a cash form and get it back to these gang, less a finder's fee, of course, for the grunt work of muling it around Minneapolis, St. Paul, and surrounding suburbs. Okay? Radical amount of drugs. Okay? This gang sold that debt somehow to the vice lords. And for those of you listening in Los Angeles and other parts of the country, New York, what's a vice lord? It's a Chicago gang that came to Minneapolis in the 1990s. And alongside of the Gangster Disciples, also out of Chicago, and they were rival factions. Very serious individuals. You didn't want to screw with them if you didn't have to. Good people as long as you didn't get on the wrong side of them. But anyways, so my friend, his debt was to them. And they called in the marker way before he had anticipated. He had not only blown some of the money that he had made from selling the stuff, but he had smoked some of it. Okay, so he didn't have any of the money, and he didn't have most of the product. And the marker's called in, which means he's in a world of crap with a very serious Chicago gang. It's probably going to cause him either a beatdown, or maybe he'll be on the side of a milk carton one day. Okay, it's that serious. So he calls me and he says, I owe the vice lords, whatever it is, $7,000 or something. I don't have it, but they said I can make up for it. I just have to kidnap this girl, and then I have to bring them this girl, and they will forgive the debt. So I'm looking for a driver. And he said, either I need you to drive for me, or I just need you to pray that I find a driver. So he's saying, hey, would you pray for me during this kidnapping? Now, the kidnapping is yet future. To this day, I don't know what the girl was that was the target. I've never known. Maybe I'll find out in eternity. But I made a judgment call. I said, normally there's a ministerial privilege, and there's a clerical or clergy privilege. However, when there's a future tense kidnapping, and possible sex trafficking was not a front page thing, and no one talked about it back then like they do now, but I knew it existed, and I knew it was bad. I didn't know if that would happen to her, if she'd be raped or dead. I knew whatever was going to happen to her wasn't good, whoever this girl was out there. So I made a judgment call. At this time, I was living in a town in Minneapolis called Columbia Heights, a northeast suburb. And it's in Anoka County. And I've known Anoka County to be one of the more corrupt counties in the upper Midwest. I knew that if I called 911 from my place, the wheels of justice would not tremble in the least. And there was a girl's life on the line, and time was ticking. It was like Back to the Future, and you're trying to prevent something terrible from happening beforehand. So I drove physically to St. Louis Park. Okay, St. Louis Park is in 952. I lived in 763, driving from northeast to more of a southern suburb, and I did it in record time. I drove 90 miles an hour, and I went to a Super America at the time. I think today they're called Speedway, and there were payphones back then. I went to the payphone, and I called 911, and they connected me with the St. Louis Park Police, dispatch, etc. I said, I don't want anyone dispatched, but I want you to know a resident of St. Louis Park has left me a voicemail, a literal voicemail, that they plan a kidnapping. It's future tense. It's going to happen. It must be prevented at all costs. Okay? They said, come on into the St. Louis Park Police Department. So I go to the St. Louis Park Police Department, and I meet with whatever cop is there. I don't even remember. He listens to the voicemail. He says, well, technically this is out of our league. But since the kidnapping is probably going to take place in Hennepin County, why don't you go to the Minneapolis Police Department? I don't know if St. Louis Park is in Hennepin County. But somehow or another, I had to go from St. Louis Park to downtown Minneapolis. So I went and I flagged down the first cop I could find, and I described the situation. The cop said, okay, let's go to the station, get in the back seat of my car. I said, I'm not getting in the back seat of your car, but I'll follow you. He said, come on, just get in the back seat. I said, quit trying to make the back seat of your car happen. It's not going to happen. I'm not a criminal. I'm not going in the back seat of your car. But you need to help this girl, or you can put me on the phone with your supervisor. Fine, follow me. So I drive with the cop, and we go to the Minneapolis Police Department. I play the audio of the voicemail. We just got to kidnap this girl, man. And then everything will be fine. Got to deliver her to the vice lords. And they pull up the rap sheet on my buddy, and you talk about a garden variety of multiple, down through the years, different stages of aging, different hairdos, different beards, multiple different mugshots. He's been arrested more times than your dog has fleas. They know who he is. And I never knew what happened, but I know there was an intervention, and I know there was a prevention. So yes, in an ideal world, if someone comes to me and says, hey, I screwed the dentist, or, I smashed someone's car window, or I felt like I gambled away the rent money or whatever, I'll keep that secret for them. And I keep a lot of secrets like that, a lot. People struggle with their sexuality. People struggle with, whether or not they want to be a parent, etc. I will take some of these to the grave, and they probably took years off of my life knowing some of this stuff, but God gives you a supernatural gifting and empowerment to handle it. Okay. But you guys got to pray for your preachers, pray for your pastors. But yes, I've had to invoke that privilege on my own behalf. And I'm sorry, other people I've invoked it when I was going to be a witness, because I wasn't going to testify against certain people that had confided in me. And this is the time I broke it. And I hope you see why I broke it. Somewhere right now, there's a young girl from 2002. What did she go on to do? Did she pursue the career that she wanted, her dreams? Is she holding hands with her husband, walking through the park? Is she looking at her children? You know what I mean? Is she taking vacations and taking pictures and being on Facebook? I don't know who she is. But somewhere right now, a family who would have been on the television begging, please come home. If you know something about our daughter, please. And they would have found her somewhere dead. That was prevented because I made a game time decision. And I've never met a person who has disagreed or thought I did something wrong on that. So, hope that answers your question. Gave you a little bit of extra bonus stuff. And by the way, I've got something coming out that you're